back to On Flight here. We're recapping day 3 of the World Junior Championship happening in Ottawa, Ontario. Swap right into today, starting with the scores from today's games. We have a 14-2 victory for the Czechs over Kazakhstan. And in this one, it's one of those games where the score could have been a lot worse. It sort of seemed like the Czechs kind of gave up a little bit towards the end, trying not to run the score up that badly against Kazakhstan. And, 14-2 after, I believe it was 12-1 after the second, seemingly could have been a lot worse, but the Czechs taking a little bit of mercy, only put in 2 after that, sort of seeming like they weren't going to do too much in this game. And fair enough, right? Because you think about it, 3 points, goal differential doesn't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. Sure, with seeding at some point down the line, it might, but you play the game the right way, eventually you get rewarded for it. In my eyes, that's what the Czechs did here, not running up the score that badly. But in this one, dominant effort from the Czechs from start to finish, really controlling the pace of play, what you want to see out of one of these games where they play a far inferior team like Kazakhstan. You want to see the Czechs really take control of this game, and they did. And they played a great game, earning the 3 points, earning a very handed victory. And as you sort of talked about yesterday, these were 2 games, expected blowouts, outside of maybe the U.S. one. I mean, in my eyes, the way that the game was played, it was a blowout. But at the same time, both games today, very well controlled by the favorite. And that's what you need to do, right? That's what you need to do when you're playing teams that aren't as good as you. Is you have to control the pace of play. Don't let them and don't give them life to come back in the game. The U.S. kind of gave it away a little bit towards the end. But at the same time, trick for the Czechs in this one was just controlling the pace, making sure that you weren't giving Kazakhstan opportunities to get back in it and squashing it when they could. So with that in mind, that's your first game of the day, kind of a blowout, not too much to talk about there. And then the second game of the day between the U.S. and Latvia, and it was a 5-1 victory for the U.S. And this was a weird kind of game where you think back to last night, Latvia coming in real hot, beating Canada 3-2 in the shootout. Yes, you probably heard it 100 times already today. But at the same time, Latvia had the momentum coming into this game, and it really showed. I think it was 1-0 after the first, and in that one goal was just a quick shot that beat the goalie. And for Latvia, a tight turnaround today. They played the 7:30 last night. They played the 3:30 today. You get the night to the morning or the afternoon game, and it's one of those tough games to sort of work yourself around. But still, time after time, Latvia showed out for this one. And it wasn't, in my eyes, it wasn't that bad of a blowout. It could have been a lot worse. Their goaltender once again stood on his head. But at the same time, this game was fairly a blowout, right? You sort of saw it where the U.S. finally started to learn how to work around that trap style. And we saw it from Canada last night. One of the things they didn't do is set the pace of play. And for the U.S. today, you really saw it. They weren't trying to force stuff into the middle of the ice. We think back to that Germany game where, the Germany had them, or I guess the U.S. was up by 3-2 halfway through the second because they were forcing pucks into the middle of the ice against the trap style. Today, the U.S. really wasn't forcing anything, and they were playing around the perimeter exactly as they're supposed to against these kind of teams who are going to trap you away. And then towards the third, game started to open up a little bit, and from there, you're not going to be able to compete head-to-head with the U.S., although, in the grand scheme of it, it was technically a 1-1 game in the third. But, for the U.S., they played the game they needed to in this one. For Latvia, a real solid performance yet again against one of the powerhouses. Still available to be relegated if they lose their game to Germany. So that will be one that I will be keeping an eye on, because that December 30th game between Germany and Latvia still has heavy standing implications. Not to mention that if they can force the overtime period against Germany, they'll likely be good. Just a matter of what happens tomorrow with Canada and Germany, which is going to be an interesting game, and we'll talk about sort of the scenarios in a little bit here. But for Latvia today, another solid performance, and really held in with the U.S. for most of the game. And it was one of those tight checking games that you were looking for out of Latvia, sort of clogging up the middle, limiting high quality chances. And that's exactly what they did in this one. For the U.S., playing their game, played well enough to get the victory, pick up the 3 points, and no real surprises there. To the news we go with the Czechs dominant as ever. 14-2 speaks volumes. Not too much to talk about there. The ins and the outs. Poor Kazakhstan's goaltenders today were in and out and back in the net. Always a tough one to see as the goaltenders get shuffled in, out throughout the game. But unfortunately, not enough. 14-2 was your final on that one. Moving on to the third piece of the news today with the U.S. back on track. These were exactly what the U.S. needed. You think back to their Germany game where they sort of looked a little bit shaky at times against that sort of rough style of defense. But they found their groove. They played well enough to get the victory today, controlled the pace of play, looked real good doing it. And if they play that sort of game against their quarterfinal opponent, they will be just fine. But when they draw problems, when they try and force stuff in the middle, your first round opponent sort of looking, assuming nothing else crazy happens, you're sort of looking at either the Slovaks or the Swiss, who both play that sort of trap style. And that's going to be the key to success, right? For the U.S., it's not forcing stuff. They can play their game, work around the outside, work around the perimeter, find those high quality chances. That's going to be the key to success for them. So for the U.S. today, really showing a good performance against a tough defense. It is something that they can really take towards going into the playoffs, especially that first round where it might have been a tougher opponent. You are looking for them to show that they are able to contend against it, and today they did that just fine. And then the fourth piece with Latvia, with the patterns. And, once, as we like to say, is a coincidence. Twice is a pattern. Twice shows that Latvia is not a throwaway team at this tournament. They had another good performance today against the top contender in this tournament, right? They beat Canada yesterday after a real good performance. The question becomes, what's next for this Latvian team? Are they able to push for that sort of, third spot? Are they going to be able to play the Czechs? Will they beat the Czechs? Might become a question, right? And at the same time, if they're able to beat Finland, look out, right? Because if Latvia beats Germany, Latvia beats Finland, you're looking, and of course the U.S. beats Canada, which at this point kind of looks like it was what it's going to be. You're looking at Latvia being the second seed and getting to play a team like Slovakia, or playing a team, like the Swiss in the quarterfinals, and likely playing for a medal. So Latvia's win yesterday has huge implications on the standings, clearly. And it will eventually come down to if the U.S. beats Canada. But one thing to definitely keep note of here is, Latvia plays a really solid game. They play tough. They play teams real tough. So when you look at sort of who else are going to be playing and who's coming up for them, you have Finland, Finland looked rough against Germany yesterday. Wasn't a great game for them. Might be a tough one in Latvia, where we've seen Latvia play better against some of these bigger teams. So it's going to be that trade-off, right? And same with Germany. Latvia versus Germany is going to be a good game. U.S. has already smoked Germany. Are they going to have that sort of trend going for them too with Latvia against Germany? I think that'll be a really good game to keep an eye on. I'm still favoring Germany, but at the same time, that Latvia is a very solid team in this tournament. Can't be counted out. And I think towards the end of this tournament, we're going to see why. And I'm curious to see if this game still goes to overtime. Because in my predictions originally, I had Germany winning in overtime. So now the question becomes, what's next for this team? But the last piece of news on the Canadian side is the injuries. And we remember yesterday with Matthew Schaefer, no update was able to be provided as we made the video right after the game as soon as we got back. Today I have an update for you. He's gone. He's not coming back to this tournament. He's out roughly 2 to 3 months with a broken collarbone. So what's next for Canada? They're bringing in Sawyer Minio. Is that the fix? I don't know. I don't think so. They're officially named into the roster, so will likely be seen tomorrow against Germany. As well, they did but they put Carson Rykoff on the roster. Another addition that I think Canada's looking for. They need some goal scorers. He's the guy to look to for that. So for Canada, it's one of those things, right, where they had a very specific team in mind for this tournament. Didn't quite work out the way they wanted to in that first game or the second game against Latvia. They looked real good against the Finns. They play Germany tomorrow in a must-win game. They play the U.S. on New Year's Eve. What's next for this team? And I have to say, I'm probably the least confident I've been. We'll talk about that when we get to the schedule. Move over now to the group standings. So in Group A, in first place. Of course, we have the US, second place Canada, Finland in third, Latvia in fourth, and Germany in fifth in that relegation spot. Remember, the bottom two teams in each group will play a single relegation game against each other on January 2nd. Loser of that will be sent back down to the Division 1A and then on to Group B. We have two teams in first place with Sweden and Czechia, 6 points each. Slovakia in third place with one regulation win, one regulation loss with 3 points. And then the bottom two teams, Kazakhstan and Switzerland, fighting for their lives in the relegation spot. At the end of the day, in my eyes, it's still going to come down to that game between the two teams. Who will avoid the relegation. Still taking Switzerland in my eyes. Kazakhstan just has not put out the performance that they're looking for. But at the same time, you really never know at this tournament, right? It's one of those weird ones where any bounce, any sort of surprise could turn the tide in the standings and in that relegation spot especially, because for most of these teams, especially in the bottom half, their goal is to get to the quarterfinals, right? For Latvia, you're trying to get to the quarterfinals. For Germany, you're trying to get to the quarterfinals. For Kazakhstan, you're trying to get to the quarterfinals. For Slovakia, a little bit this year, you're trying to get to the quarterfinals. I know Slovakia, sort of a little bit of a different scenario, but still, you're trying to not get relegated to this tournament. I think as much as it might not be the best Slovak team we've seen, they're still a decent team, and I think they will contend. But the one thing I will also mention here with the standings is take a look out for Canada. If they lose this game coming up tomorrow against Germany, the standings are going to become a problem for Canada, right? Where you have Germany with a win now, so they have 3 points. Latvia with 2 points with the overtime win, or basically overtime, the shootout win against Canada. So in theory, right, if you're looking at the schedule, and this is sort of a what if, we'll have a better sense of this tomorrow. Assuming Canada wins, nothing really matters here. But if Germany were to beat Canada in regulation, Latvia were to beat Germany in overtime, then all of a sudden you have two teams that are beating Canada with 4 points. Then it comes down to Finland beating Latvia in any fashion, which would put Finland over Canada, and then the US beats Canada, would put Canada on home ice in the relegation game. Who would have thought, right? Yeah, it's one of those kind of weird scenarios that with the win against Canada, Latvia all of a sudden has put themselves in a real good spot in this tournament to not only make it to the quarterfinals, but actually do something in those quarterfinals and make it to a point where if they can win the right games and win it by enough, that's going to be the key to success for Latvia in this tournament, is beating the teams. They have 2 more games left, right? They have Finland, they have Germany. If they can win both those games, assuming Canada beats Germany, which likely will happen, and then the US, who knows, right? If Canada loses to the US, we could see Latvia in this, or if Canada loses to the US, we could see Latvia in that second spot. And that would be, I think, a surprise to many. Likely would end up yet another, I might add, Canada-Czechia quarterfinal, which, we all remember the storylines from that one. Probably not the one Canada wants to see on home ice. But, a lot of what ifs. Be sure to come back tomorrow. There's 4 games on the slate. We'll flip it over to that now. That's going to be the key to success, right? 4 games. We'll break it all down after that. 4 games in the standings makes a big difference. And we'll talk about them now. So we have Sweden and Switzerland coming up at 12 o'clock. This will be a really good game, in my opinion. Switzerland's been a team that's sort of contended, with Czechia. They played a real good game against the Slovaks the other day. And they've just lost by a small margin, right? Just that little bit that they could have very well won that game, but it's just small little details that sort of change the momentum of games, and that becomes the end result. So in this one, I would not be surprised to see a team like Sweden lose this game to Switzerland. But Switzerland is a very solid team. They play the right way. Sweden still, of course, is the favorite in this one. But don't be surprised if this game comes down to the wire. Very well could be a tight game. But in the long run, I'm still taking Sweden here. I think it probably will be a decent margin of a victory, but at the same time, not a guarantee in this one. The second game of the day, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, is between US and Finland. And this is, one of those marquee matchups. In my opinion, probably the game of the day, maybe coupled with the second game. And, the US has looked really, really sloppy against Germany, has looked a little bit to a lot better against Latvia. And now the question remains is, what are they going to look like against the best team that plays the trap style with Finland, who actually, if you do mess up, it likely will end up in the back of your net. And I'm very curious to see this one. You know, the U.S. is going to come off of a sort of that back-to-back games. What's it going to be, right? Which U.S. team is going to show up in this one? And for Finland, they've had a rough start to this tournament, narrowly beating Germany, losing to Canada off the top. What team are we going to see from Finland? And, you know, in my eyes, there's a lot of question marks around this game. Still going to take the U.S. because you kind of have to on paper, but this game will likely be a pretty close game right down to the final whistle. So don't be surprised in this one to see a Finland victory or a very close game at the very least, but also don't be surprised if the U.S. runs away with it. Really going to come down to which U.S. team shows up and which Finland team shows up to the game. So that'll be a marquee matchup. The second marquee matchup is between the Czechs and the Slovaks, and this game at 5 o'clock is one of those games that, you know, gonna come down to the goaltending, right? Once again, it's gonna come down to the goaltending. It always does between these two teams. Which goaltender is gonna show up? You know, is it gonna be Urban or is it gonna be Rabel from the Czechs? And I don't know, right? Because at the end of the day, it's gonna come down to the best goaltender is probably gonna end up winning this game. The Czechs and the Slovaks are two teams very, very equal in strength, very, very equal in terms of their play style. And what we end up seeing is that these games get real tight right down to the final whistle. So it really wouldn't surprise me to see these two teams go to overtime. Wouldn't surprise me to see these be a low-scoring game or a high-scoring game, right? Where it's really just going to come down to which goaltenders show up to this one. If the teams play as they've done throughout this tournament, you know, the Czechs won today 14-2. Did they use up all their goals against the Kazakhs, or did they save some of them for Slovakia, right? The questions that I think will be answered pretty quickly or early on in this game, but at the same time, really could go either way in this one. So 5 o'clock, Czechs and Slovaks, going to be a good one. And then, of course, the Canada game, which somehow we're actually questioning, right? Canada and Germany, 7:30 p.m. And I have to say, coming into this tournament, I would have told you, you know, Canada's going to wipe them, right? I think I had 6-1 Canada over Germany in the predictions. I don't know now. I am, especially after seeing the Latvia game, I'm starting to get worried. It will be interesting to see sort of what the additions are to the Canadian team, if that'll help them against Germany or if it'll hinder them. And I think in the long run, you know, Canada is still expected to win this game, and anything short of that, you know, would be lying. But it's not guaranteed to see Canada win this game, and we'll see sort of as this game goes on. What I will say is look for that opening sort of 10 minutes. If Canada's able to pot two, you'll likely see a Canada runaway. If they're not, this game will come down to the wire. And I have to say, I'm starting to get worried for this game already. I know it's tomorrow, but this game has been keeping me up for the last couple nights, and especially after seeing the Latvia one, it's not a guarantee in this tournament. No game is, and we'll see which Canada team shows up. Still expecting Germany to play a good, solid game, but it will come down to the wire in that one. So now we go to the questions and the thoughts from today. We did throw out a poll, so be sure to follow us on the fly 1515 on Twitter, as we do post a sort of a reach out, a question for us to answer here on the channel. So be sure to follow us over there. We post it after every final game of the day. So if you want to be featured, be sure to respond to that poll. We only have one comment today from Nick, the Iihf fan, who says, Latvia's performance against the U.S. becomes far more impressive, given that they had a turnaround of about 17 hours coming off their big win over Canada. Czechs, Kazakhstan, not much I can say there. And I mean, you know, it was one of those things, right, where in terms of that Latvia team, they're a solid team. And as much as, you know, I think I wrote them off yesterday, I didn't write them off yesterday, you know, singing their praises. This is a good Latvian team, and they're playing a good style of hockey. They're sticking to their structure. And that was one of the things I was interested in going into the third period of this U.S. game, is how close would they stick to the structure when they were down. And that's one of the biggest problems with your trap style, is that if you're down, it's really tough to come back, because you either have to break off the strategy and start playing a little bit more free, or, of course, you play the defensive structure. And if the U.S. decides to skate around and pass around, you're probably not going to get the puck back for 2-3 minutes at a time. That becomes the problem if they play it right. But, the Latvians sort of played a little bit more free. So, for Latvia, a good solid team at this tournament, and anything short of that would be lying, right? If they have a good team, they've proven themselves these last 2 games, and now it's just a matter of how far in this tournament are they going to be able to go? Are they going to be able to upset, Finland? And that's a big game too that I think a lot of people are probably going to write off, but, it's not a guarantee in this tournament. You have a big game against Germany on the 30th, right? What's going to happen there? 31st, you play Finland, right? Who's going to be the big player on this team that's going to step up and lead Latvia to the second place in Group A? Something to keep an eye on over the next few days as we head towards the playoffs. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like. If you realize you're subscribing, tell all your friends to comment down below your thoughts on Day 3 of the World Junior Championship. Until next time, see you.